even though I haven't had anything to drink now since September 1st, I'm noticing that my hydration has an impact on my sleep. And the more just straight water I get in during the day, the more energy I have during that day and the next day. I noticed that yesterday. I woke up and I was like just like sluggish. Like, ugh. So yesterday I've made it a point to drink a lot more water, and that helped out a lot. I feel pretty good. So anyway, for whatever that's worth, drink more water. So today is kind of sticking with this whole theme of kind of using the art of peace, using your mindfulness practice, using the four bells, using this to get better at dealing with violence, get better with dealing with conflict. That's one of the hardest things I think any person has to deal with, especially if they're military trained. Now, so much of military training is kind of how to be disciplined and how to follow orders and fit inside the structure, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot to the military mindset that kind of supports the creation of a strength, a willingness to battle, a willingness to go into a violent space and to be violent and how to do it well. And, a part of that culture is an interaction between kind of the soldiers and service members themselves that really create a environment where, force meets force and the stronger force wins. And that understanding is old, it's archaic, it's kind of dumb, it's based off of kind of techniques that have been around for a long time that don't actually work. They work for a little while, but, part of this whole, be the strongest kid on the block, be the toughest, be the hardest, that it works fine as long as you're the toughest and the strongest, but it starts to break down when you start to meet your match. And once you meet your match, which is largely what, the nuclear weapons do, once you meet your match, your use of force becomes a problem. You can't do it. And so, that's ultimately what we came to with the nuclear arms race with Russia, was a point where if anybody used their nuclear weapons, we were all screwed. Well, now our next big issues is going to be with China, which is, growing like gangbusters. They have the second biggest military. They have the second biggest economy, and they're just moving, right? They're doing their thing. And so before when we had, unparalleled dominance, like there was nobody that even came close to us, it's not a problem to be forceful. I mean, it's like with my children, right? It's not a problem for me to be forceful with them. I mean, I have absolute dominance over them, not a problem. The problem arises when I rely on that style, right, to get things done as my default. Right? So if my default becomes I'm stronger than you, do what I say, then I'm only getting good at I'm stronger than you, do what I say. The problem with I'm stronger than you, do what I say is when the other side doesn't do what you say, you have to resort to violence. And if you have to resort to some kind of violence, then you've already lost. The second you have to resort to violence, you've already lost. So what do you do? What do you do if there's violence? What do you do if you engage with violence? Now, what I want to do is I want to take this conversation into the realm of, personally. Like, what do you do when you personally interact with violence? Not what the state does. But when you personally interact with violence, the best way to handle violence is to let it come. Let it come to you. Let it come to you, greet it, and blend with it. This is the stanza. When an opponent comes forward, move in and greet them. If they want to pull back, send them on their way. There's no resistance in the sense of meeting force with force. There's no attempt to overpower. What there is a kind of a standing next to and guiding. And well, the reason why I say spinning the violence out of violence, is if you can meet whatever's coming at you in a non-forceful way. So force coming at you, you meet it in a non-forceful way. So like that, right? Not run away, not run away, right? But you meet it in a non-forceful way. You can send that force in directions that force did not see coming. And when you do that, it really disrupts force. Force has a very hard time navigating subtle change that doesn't create more force. So force is like fire, right? Fire needs fuel. Fire needs fuel to keep going. And if fire is met with emptiness, if fire is met with if fire's allowed to burn but just not fueled, fire will just go out. That's the analogy. If fire is allowed to burn without fuel, then it will just go out. And so that's what I'm talking about here, spinning the violence out of violence. So what you do, for example, on Facebook, okay? So say you get into a political, you find something triggering on Facebook and you want to engage, okay? The very first thing that you have to assess is what is triggered inside of you. Because until you understand that, engaging with any kind of forceful engagement is going to be a problem. It's, if you don't know the art, I mean, this will go back to stanza 5. If you've not linked yourself to true emptiness, you'll never understand the art of peace. That's what that means. So you have to, when something triggers you on social media, you have to first recognize that you've been triggered. Because if you don't know that, then that becomes a liability. When I say you cannot meet force with force, you can't meet force with force. It's not a little bit of force. It's nothing. It's got to be 0. Because if you come with 1 or 2 or like, plus 0.5, some weak ass shit, right? So you come with some plus 0.5, the force coming at you will lick its lips and be ready to pounce. But if you come with 0, okay, if you meet force with 0, force does not know what to do. It gets very confused because force practices with other force. That's the thing. Force doesn't practice with 0. Force practices with its match, because that's what force thinks. Force thinks that the stronger and tougher and the more badass I get, the more badass I will be. But that's just, that's really child's play. It's really the kind of adolescent mindset that kind of fosters a whole lot of our culture, right? A whole lot of our culture is our forcefulness being expressed in ways that kind of clarify a winner, right? So football, mixed martial arts, MMA, these sports, these games, these violent games, they support a winner, right? And they clearly state this is the winner. Now the problem, of course, is that doesn't last. It's you're the winner for now, but then you're not. Now the story of it could last. You become a legend. But the problem again is that if you take that same mindset out of the ring and put it into a social context, it's a disaster. It's a freaking disaster. It's no good. The more you practice trying to dominate force, the less time you have to practice spinning and blending with force. And so I'll finish up by saying, if you want to change your behavior, if you want to move from, being triggered and frustrated to, being curious about what would happen if you learned how to blend with force, or if you learned how to spin violence out of violence, if you want to learn how to do that, then the place to start is the practice. And the reason why the place to start is the practice is because as long as you're aware of what's going on within yourself, then, and you have these skills, right? You're not, it's not just a, well, I went and I was empty and I got triggered and then I was off to the races. It's not like that. You have to start to understand that what's going on inside of you, what's being triggered inside of you is the very first thing you have to meet. Because before you meet that, before you interact with that, and you try to go into a force situation and bring zero to force, your internal environment will betray you. So you have to have awareness of your internal environment. Once you have awareness of your internal environment, you've got to understand where it is. Okay, it's got to be clear to you that your internal environment is taking place somewhere. And once that happens, you can start to interact with it. Now, once you interact with it, then you can bring your best version to the table. Then you can spin violence out of violence. But until then, you can't. You just can't. And it's not a matter of, well, I say you can't. It's a matter of you physically can't. You intellectually can't. And the problem is that all these things are hierarchical. Now, it is a fact that much of what we are as human beings is hierarchical. We have hierarchical processes inside of our bodies. We have nervous systems that prioritize things over other things. So all that is natural. It's ingrained. Let me say that the natural world includes force. But what I'm saying is that the human world doesn't have to. The human world doesn't have to be a constant force engagement. It doesn't have to be. So in order for you to participate with that, you have to understand the four bells. And I'm not plugging the four bells because I created the four bells. I'm plugging the four bells because you have to understand these things in order to make that choice. And the reason why you have to understand the four bells in order to make that choice is because if you don't tame the lizard brain, if you don't understand what's going on in your limbic system and where and how to interact with it, you can't get to the prefrontal cortex. You cannot get to bigger picture. And if you can't get to bigger picture, you're not going to have the wherewithal to do what's necessary to spin the violence out of violence. So, again, I'm plugging Armor Down. I'm plugging the four bells, not because, follow Armor Down, follow the four bells, but there's no other way to do it. You cannot go into a forceful environment without self-awareness. And you can't be any good at going into a forceful environment if you don't know the types of things that show up for you when you're in that environment. Now, you already know the types of things that show up for you when you're on social media. You know what triggers you. You know what stuff you push away. You know what stuff you engage with. So you know all that. So what I'm saying is that you can also know what's going on inside yourself when you're being triggered, and then you can start to practice. And it's actually quite fun. Social media really offers a great environment for it because it's not like you're going to have to physically fight the person, right? You don't have to physically fight the person, which is nice. So it's more intellectual. It's more of a battle of wits and humor and subtlety and nuance, and that's quite fun. But if you just keep in mind that the goal isn't to win, the goal is to get to zero. The goal is to negate the violent upsurge. The goal is to get to zero. Once you realize that the goal is to get to zero, then it becomes, much less. There's less pressure. There's less and also, how many times have you actually won an argument on Facebook? It just doesn't happen. Lord, you go into the whole conversation about how we've literally, nobody knows what zero is anymore because everyone's fighting everyone else. It's a mess. So if the goal of getting to zero is a novel goal. It's new. Get to zero. I want to win. Win what? For how long? Forever. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's today's stanza. So if your opponent comes forward, move in and greet them. If they pull back, send them on their way. So let's get to some training, and we'll finish up for the week, and we'll get to go on the weekend. All right, what cues you to comfort? Are you that much more aware now of what cues you to comfort? If I asked you, if I said, hey, what are the cues you follow for comfort? What would you say? And do you have the kind of the skill set? Have you developed the skill set for how to address those cues? And, are you working on it? All right. So here comes bell one. Tame the mind with the senses. Taming the lizard brain, whatever you want to call it. Taming the mind with the senses. So sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. I'm just noticing again, it feels really nice to just close my eyes. So close my eyes. There you go, I cover it. There's no smells around me. Tiniest bit of sound from the refrigerator. There's a far off horn of a train. Other than that, everything's kind of empty. I can kind of hear, it's about 4 miles away at the train tracks. I can kind of hear the of the train moving. I notice temperature on my skin. The tops of my forearms feel a little bit cold. I can still recognize light and shadow behind my eyes. Coolness on my chin. Remember, first bell is all about taming the mind. Bringing the mind into engagement with the present moment. Second bell, get to the body. Feel your ground, what's beneath you. Definitely add some movement. Add some movement around your legs or your hips, just to create feedback. There's lots of feedback to be had. Subtlety that you weren't aware of, nuance that wouldn't have shown up otherwise. Core space. Belly button, sides, lower back. Heart space, shoulder blades, collarbones. throat space, jaw, inside the throat, outside the throat. Top of the head, top of the spine. Now let's do some fire breathing again. Just if you want to try it, feel free. If you're not interested in trying the fire breath, just focus on your breath for the next couple minutes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do fire breath for a little bit, and then I'm going to sit quietly. So I encourage you just to try it, and you don't have to go constant like I'm doing. You could just go rapid fire still. So something like this, you go and then just pause, maybe 5 and then pause. But the way fire breathing works is it's all about you're kind of like if you had it's like a trampoline. So you kind of press on the trampoline springs back and it kind of bounces a little bit. So that's what you do with your diaphragm. Your diaphragm's like a spring, and you're just kind of like, plucking it, so the breath just kind of picks up. So fire breath works that way, speeds things up, but it also speeds things up to a kind of a new constant state. So it's not like constantly speeding up. It's not a continuation of acceleration. It's just a lift in the pace of the breath, and then you kind of even out. So I'll do that for a little bit, and then I'm going to go to quiet. Hand over your heart if you like. 4th bell, okay? We don't do all this stuff to relax. We do all this stuff to bring our best selves to some of the most challenging things that we can, or to bring our best selves to a quiet moment like this to express our most open-hearted feelings of gratitude and compassion for others. And so that's what that's what all this stuff is for. I mean, just think of how often our behaviors are driven by closed-heartedness, how much our armor separates us. These are all things that kind of contribute to a life that just starts to pull from you. It becomes less and less worth living. The opposite is also true. If we can give of ourselves, if we can give of our open-heartedness and our goodwill, then change our behaviors so that we're less inclined to put our armor up and more inclined to armor down and open our hearts. If that becomes the case, just think of how much your behavior could change. And so what we do in the morning practice is we get to open-heartedness and then practice at open-heartedness. So what are you grateful for? Can you articulate easily in your own mind, silently to yourself, so no one could hear you? No one would know that you're opening your heart right now. What would be the first thing that you're grateful for? What would show up? What would you see in your head? And next, what would show up in your mind's eye if you thought about compassion? If you thought about people suffering, where would your mind go, and what would you offer them? How would you? It's like praying, There's no difference between this and praying. You're just offering your goodwill to others in a form that's meaningful for you. And there's no limitation here. If you've got a religious practice, this is here. If you've got a belief structure, this is here. It's all here. It's getting to there. It's getting the armor down. In order to get the armor down, you've got to go through the steps. But once you've got it down, then now's your chance to open your heart and share. Give it away. It's why honor is such a significant thing for me and for my understanding, is that you don't buy armor. You don't get more armor by going somewhere and getting it. You get more honor by giving. So the more you're giving, even if it's in your mind, the more you're doing that, the more you're cultivating this goodwill that's within, and it is an infinite space. That's what we've come to understand about the human experience through the stories that have been passed on forever. That the infinite space inside of us is not forced production. The infinite space inside of us is compassion. That's where the strength truly lies. You want to see how tough you are, how strong you are, how long you can be strong, then study compassion. Don't study force. Force is about the most limited element of the human experience there is. Compassion, on the other hand, that's infinite. And so another week's over. We've got 49 stanzas left, well over halfway. So that's cool. We've come a long way. I mean, just think of, we started back, when did we start? The 13th of July. We started practicing the art of peace on the 13th of July. Think of how the world has changed since July. And it's just been so cool to have so many of you here with me the whole time. So thank you. Here comes the weekend, so no training Saturday or Sunday, but we'll be back at it on Monday. Of course, I'm accessible through social media. Please feel free. Hey Mahatma, how are you? Good to see you. And yeah, that's that. Later, I'm